It is noon, so we will go ahead and get started. My name is Amanda Pasick, Associate Director of Digital Marketing for Selby Gardens, and we have a great presentation for you today, the second part of our three-part series, Delicious History. So without further ado, I'll let John McCarthy, Vice President for Regional History, take it away.
Thanks, Amanda. And thanks everybody for coming back for part two. I've got some special treats for you today. I'm really enjoying um, combining history with the food recipes, and I appreciate you joining us today. I want to extend a big thank you to Jennifer Romanecki, our President and CEO, for supporting me in doing these programs. And I hope you can also make our next program, which is coming up next month. Um, I gather information and images and recipes from many different sources, and we'll talk about some of those in greater specifics as we move forward. This whole series was inspired by a woman named Fran Newton, who was a long-term volunteer at Historic Spanish Point and who worked with a committee to put together a cookbook really focused on the history, the old Florida recipes, and to combine the history and the food. So she inspired me to do what I'm doing today. And by the way, if you didn't see part one of this series, it is up on the Marie Selby Botanical Gardens YouTube channel. I'll mention just again, as I did last time, that this cookbook won a nationwide award for cookbooks back in 1994 from the Tabasco company. So that was kind of cool. And Fran Newton used to do cooking classes at Spanish Point all the time and combined history with cooking. And here in this image, you can see that she was putting the participants in this cooking class to work. Everybody had a chance to participate in the prep, and then everyone enjoyed a nice meal. And she did all sorts of different recipes and really brought kind of the history to life with the food. She was enamored with the fact that Spanish Point, half of the property there, half of the land itself was the result of meals of seafood and shellfish. And as the Native Americans, got their nourishment, they also built up the land and essentially created the entire point and the large shell ring that the Guptill House sits adjacent to and atop. So the Spanish Point campus is actually a land that was created by eating. And so I think it's interesting to celebrate. As with part one, I have some recipes that come from a Sarasota Women's Club cookbook that came out at the end of 1913 and was made available for folks in 1914. You can see the table of contents shows all different types of menu items that the women shared. And who would think that, over 111 years later, we'd still be using recipes out of their cookbook. And of course, a lot of these recipes also, especially some of the ones we're dealing with today, came from the Fran Newton's cookbook that was created. And then I also have added recipes from two other sources today. My wife contributed the little key lime book, and there was a recipe in there that she really liked and we really enjoyed. So I included that today. And then also, because we're going way back in time, I was able to get some recipes from the Seminole Tribune that is published for the Seminole Nation who live in South Florida. So I also like to thank the volunteers that helped me assemble the historical information, Peg Kapustiak, Marlene O'Neill, Heather Bell, and Susan Lowy. I enjoy working with these volunteers, and they help to make my programs better. So part two of Delicious History, I'm going to go way back in time. Our great nation is going to celebrate its 250th anniversary next year. So I thought it would be good to go back and see what were people eating, in this case, 249 years ago, and what was Florida all about at that time. And then we're going to get into the old Florida staples as we did last time. And this is going to be a combination of Seminole Indian recipes and recipes from the Cuban tradition. Big influences on food in Florida. And then we're going to get into sweets and treats, just like last time, some delicious desserts and maybe a few other treats. So let's go ahead and get started with Florida food in 1776. So before we get into the food, let's talk a little bit about what Florida was like in 1776, because that's a long time ago. A lot of people aren't taught a lot of Florida history in school, so I'll give you a little bit today. At this point in time in 1776, Florida is owned by Great Britain. And there was kind of two halves to Florida. There was the Panhandle, which was called West Florida, and there was the Peninsula, which was called East Florida. And the people that were living here, along the coastline, it was mostly fisher folk who came up from Cuba, both men and women. There were a number of fish camps along the west coast of Florida. Uh, and these fish camps began seasonally in the springtime. The fishermen would come from Cuba to catch extra fish to sell back on the island of Cuba, and then they would come in the summertime to take turtles off the beach. The same type of thing happened over on the east coast of Florida as well, where there was at least one fish camp that was run by a Cuban woman named Piedra. At any rate, the other group of people that were living in Florida at the time, and it's really two groups of Native Americans. There are still some of the original Native Americans who'd been living in Florida for thousands of years. If we lived a little further south, we would call them Calusa Indians, and that's why you have the Caloosahatchee River down in Lee County. But you also had Creeks coming down from Georgia and Alabama and other areas. And these are the people that would ultimately be branded as the Seminoles. And so this is kind of a pivotal time where you still have some of the original Native Americans that have been in Florida for thousands of years, but then you have these other Native Americans that are coming down into Florida, raising cattle, and also engaged with the fishermen along the shoreline. And then at this point in time, slavery was not something that was an acceptable thing in Florida. And so a number of people that had been enslaved in other southern states would make their way into Florida. And then they would also be working at the fish camps along the shoreline and practicing agriculture and, eking out an existence in a very primitive Florida at that time. And then you had British loyalists. These were people that had come to the Americas and were loyal to the British Crown, largely because Florida was self-sufficient. Florida was exporting. Florida wasn't really importing anything. And so the people that were here in Florida from the British Isles, they didn't feel the tax pressure that the people in New England were feeling. And in fact, Florida didn't send anyone to the Continental Congress to even talk about being one of the original colonies. So this is basically who was living in Florida at the time. And it was a population in 1776. There was no census, but it's estimated that the population was approximately 4,000 people. So that is, everyone is spread very, very thin. Most people are living along the coast because that's where all the transportation was. And just to put that in perspective, within the 13 colonies, there were estimated to be 2.5 million people, and then 4,000 down here in Florida. The commodities that were valuable in Florida at that time included pitch, tar, and turpentine, all products of tapping the tall pine trees that grew throughout the inland areas. And this was like gold to Europe because they needed pine to build ships. They needed pitch, tar, and turpentine to build ships and to do many other things. And so this was one of the greatest commodities that Europe saw in the New World for export back to Europe. Also, the lumber products themselves, the live oak wood, which was very tough and durable and great for shipbuilding, the cedar and cypress, the yellow pine, which again was also producing the pitch, tar, and turpentine, and then mahogany. And most people don't realize that mahogany is native to the Caribbean and to Florida and was not known in the Old World. It's a New World discovery, and then much of it shipped back to Europe to create the fine furniture made out of mahogany that's considered European furniture, but it's all made out of American wood. And then indigo was another, there's a native indigo that was found in Florida by the British in the 1700s. And so they saw that as a tremendous opportunity to grow that crop and also introduce other indigo crops. Rice was seen as one of the easiest things to grow in Florida. And so there was tremendous emphasis on growing rice, and then again for export as well as for use here. Florida's coastlines in the spring and summertime would just be filled with marine turtles, and they were kind of an easy catch. And and then also sharks, which were caught mostly for their oil, for use in lamps, and types of things that we don't even think about using oil for today. The coinage that you see here is from the reign of King George III, and this was the coinage that was available in 1776. So a Dutch map maker was engaged by the British government to come to Florida and to survey and to evaluate where the opportunities were to make money from Florida. And so he wrote a book called The Concise Natural History of East and West Florida. His name was Bernard Romans, and he explored here in 1771, and then created a map, and then did his first publication of the book, I believe, in 1775 in England. And then it was published again in New York in 1776, which is the version that I have here to the left. But again, to look at some of the menu items, if you will, the food crops that he could observe and report back to the British government that there was opportunity for here was rice and maize, or corn, as we would call it now, peas, sweet potato, buckwheat, sesame seeds, and with the idea of being not to put on your burger bun, but for the oil that you would produce from the sesame seeds, beans, pumpkin, kunti, which is a native cycad, very important to the diet of the Native Americans that lived here, and also seen as a commercial enterprise at this point in time. Sugar, which sugar cane had originally been introduced to Florida and St. Augustine in the 1500s, but really didn't come into its own until Great Britain owned Florida, and the first major sugarcane plantations were created in New Smyrna Beach. Lemons, oranges, we talked about that in our last program, and then beef from the cattle that had been brought by the Spanish back in the 1500s, pork from the pigs that had been brought by the Spanish back in the 1500s. And again, you see sea turtle, deer, and other game available in abundance, is how Romans described all these things. So as I began to look at this, I thought that it might be interesting to, kind of look at some of the cultural influences of this food, because the Native American food at the time, a lot of kunti consumption, where they'd take the root and turn it into a flour and cook it just right so that it was healthy to eat. The palm heart, what we talked about, swamp cabbage in our last program. And then maize, an early form of corn, and squash. So these are all Native American plants here over the millennia, and a huge part of the diet of the Creeks and the early Seminoles. Then you had this, Spanish, Cuban, Mediterranean influence with the peas and the honey, the pork and the beef and the citrus. All these things were available in Florida simply because of the expeditions from Spain and other European countries to Florida and the connection to Cuba. And then you had an African influence with yams, rice, sesame seed, ground nut, which is something similar to what we would call a peanut, and then collard greens and watermelon. And all these things are native to Africa. And all these things became part of, that trade routes, and all of this influenced what people were eating in Florida. So it was a real smorgasbord. And then I thought, before we move into the food recipes, which we're going to do here in a minute, I just wanted to share this map, this little section of Bernard Roman's map, because it shows the Sarasota area. And if you look in the middle, you can see Boca Sarasota, and so that's showing Big Pass. A little bit north of that, you see a squiggly little island called Palm Island. That's what we call Longboat Key today. Sarasota Bay back then was called Palm Sound. Siesta Key, which is just south of the Boca Sarasota in the middle there, is called Clam Island. And then if you work your way south, you get down to the Nokomis area, what we now call Shake It Creek. They called the Rocky River, which makes sense. It was filled with oysters, and, it was probably a very rocky bottom there. And then a place called the Hallover, which is what we now call Casperson Beach, where they would bring the ships up to scrape the barnacles off of them right there on the beach. So I think it's fascinating to see a map of the area that's 249 years old that shows these barrier islands pretty much the way they are today. By the way, Point of Rocks is shown here as Rocky Point. And so it's interesting to look back and see that history. That's what Sarasota looked like at the time our nation was founded. So when I say old Florida staples this time, I really mean it. We're going to get into some Seminole Indian recipes. And Seminole fry bread is the first type of Seminole Indian food that I ever ate. When I went down to the reservation for a cultural celebration several years ago, I wanted to indulge in some Native American food. And this was what the first thing that was available is fry bread. So I wanted to start with that today. And you don't need very much to create fry bread. You just need some self-rising flour, some water, and some oil. And you put the flour in a large bowl and you use one hand to mix it while you're pouring water in with the other hand. And you want to mix it until it just gets slightly sticky. And if it gets too wet, then you put a little more flour in. If it's too dry, you put a little more water in. Then you get you heat the oil very hot in a deep pan because you want your flour to be completely submerged in it when you pop it into that pan. And then you flour your hands so they don't stick to it, tear off a piece of the dough that you've kneaded and make it into either a little pancake size or more commonly a much larger size, which you see in the photograph. And then you carefully place that dough in that hot oil for 5 seconds. And when I say carefully place it, because you don't want anything to splash because that oil is hot. You're going to cook it for 5 seconds on one side, flip it, and cook it for 5 seconds on the other side. And then put it on a towel or paper towels or something like that to drain the excess oil. Now, fry bread is consumed just as a fry bread. It's also used folded over to make sandwiches, pork sandwiches and beef sandwiches and things like that. And so this is a very, very, it's a key part of the Seminole diet at this point in time. And there's another version of it made out of pumpkin. So I thought we should explore this one. And this recipe is a little more sophisticated. We need 5 cups of self-rising flour. We need 1.5 cups of sugar. We need 16 ounces of pumpkin. We need a tablespoon of powdered sugar if we have it, and some vegetable oil again to cook it in. And in this case, you're mixing the flour and the sugar and the pumpkin together until it forms a dough. And then you're going to let that cool and cure for an hour or in some cases overnight and kind of let that pumpkin and the flour and the sugar all kind of come together there. And then you want to form some flat discs, 1 inch thick, maybe 1/4 cup of dough, and just keep making those because this is more like a treat instead of like a big, huge meal. And then you'll heat that oil up again real hot and enough depth to completely submerge your dough, and then fry it until the edges turn brown, flip it, fry it again, and then again drain it of the excess oil. And in this case, to make it a little more of a special treat, if you have some powdered sugar, you put that on there as well. Now, the other very, very typical Seminole meal that is typically available within a Seminole camp all day long, all the time, is something called softy. And softy has been made by Native American cultures all over the Indian country up to this modern day. And it's basically a rice soup, but it's considered more like a drink. And you take 2 quarts of water, 1 teaspoon of baking powder, 2 cups of white rice, and 3 tablespoons of cornstarch. You bring your water to the boil and add the rice and the cornstarch. And you just have to keep stirring it because you're cooking it on a fire and you don't want it to stick to the big pot. Boil it for about 12 minutes, lower the heat, add the baking powder, and now keep stirring it until that rice is tender. And again, this is the type of thing that would be cooked over a communal fire. Seminole fires are interesting because they take logs of wood and they point them to the middle of the fire so that as they cook during the day and through the night, they just keep pushing the logs into the center of the fire. They don't have to keep adding logs onto it. And so Seminole sake is prized by, the living Seminoles that are in Florida today. It's a major part of their diet. To me, it leaves a little bit to be desired because to me, it seems very thin. When I first had it, I thought it was going to be more like a rice soup, but that's really not it. Again, it's almost more like a drink at this point. But if you want to enjoy these types of foods made by the Seminoles, you can go down to the Atataki Museum in early November each year. They do a cultural celebration, and you can indulge in these Seminole recipes at that time. Another favorite recipe is Seminole baked hominy. And in this case, you need some bacon, 8 strips of it, 2 pounds of cooked hominy, which is either dried white or yellow corn, some salt and pepper, and some green onion chopped up. You want to fry those bacon pieces until they're brown and very crisp. You want to add the hominy and the salt and pepper and stir it around for 6 or 8 minutes in your frying pan. Add the green onions, cook it another 5 minutes, and then serve it immediately. So now these meals do not represent what the Seminoles ate in Florida 250 years ago. These meals represent what the Seminole tradition is now, based upon essentially the federal subsidies of food that was provided to them when they were forced onto the reservations. So when they were forced into these smaller reservation areas and they couldn't fish and hunt wildly, and widely the way they used to, basically the federal government said, we're giving you flour, we're giving you sugar, we're giving you corn. That's what you're getting. You're getting oil. And so a lot of their menu items simply repeat those same ingredients over and over and over again because that's really all they had to eat. And it's really not the healthiest food in the world. And frankly, the tribe is dealing with that now, that these somewhat unhealthy foods have become their tradition. And so now they're trying to get back to some of their older roots. But these will always be the traditional meals because this is what the grandparents know how to cook and teach their children and grandchildren and great grandchildren what to cook and what to eat. This is, I think, the last one that's a Seminole style recipe, and this is pawpaw cookies. Pawpaw plants are kind of rare these days, but years ago I used to see them out in the pine flatwoods. And if you can't find pawpaw, you can substitute bananas, mashed bananas. So you take 1.5 cups of your pawpaw pulp, or your mashed bananas, 3/4 cup of shortening, 1.5 cup of sugar, an egg, 3 cups of flour, tablespoon of baking soda, teaspoon of salt, 1/4 teaspoon of ginger, 1/4 teaspoon of allspice, teaspoon of nutmeg, and a teaspoon of cinnamon. So you got all kind of little spices going on. So you want to cream that shortening and sugar, and then add your beaten egg and the pawpaw or your mashed bananas. Stir in those dry ingredients, all your spices, and mix it up really good. And then form it into little balls, place it on a cookie sheet. Then you take a glass or an old tin can or something like that, and you put a little grease on the bottom and use that to flatten out your little balls that you put on the cookie sheet to make the little cookies. Bake in the oven for 15 minutes, and you have a delightful treat. So we've covered a bread product, a pumpkin bread product, the soft key drink, and the pawpaw cookies. And it is difficult to find other Seminole Indian recipes. I mean, these are some of the basic ones. And then this one kind of bridges a little bit of a gap. This is actually out of the Cooking Then and Now cookbook that Fran Newton put together. And I think this was her recipe. And so this is Spanish bayonet salad. And you gather the flowers off the plant with care. This is a little bit like the rattlesnake recipe we talked about last time. The Spanish bayonet is a yucca that is very spiny at the ends of those leaves. So you have to be careful to harvest those flowers. But if you're successful in doing that, then you need 3 cups of the petals, 1 tomato sliced, 1/2 cup of iceberg lettuce, 1 small onion, and a teaspoon of fresh basil. And then for the dressing, you do 2 tablespoons of safflower oil, 3 tablespoons of rice wine vinegar. And all you really need to do is put all these things together in a bowl, toss them around with the dressing, and salt and pepper it to taste. Many of us have seen these Spanish bayonets and we've seen them in bloom. I never dreamed that you could make a salad out of the blossoms. So this is another example of how the plant world provides nourishment for people and why it's so important. So now we're going to kind of convert over to the Cuban influence because there's a huge Cuban influence on Florida food. And black beans are actually native to Cuba. They're one of the foods of the New World. They were not known in the Old World until the New World was discovered, but they had been known here for years. So there's a couple of different ways to cook up black beans. We're gonna do a couple of different things with black beans today. But here's a basic recipe. And that is you take a pound of black beans, you take a meat bone, it's a ham hock or a beef bone, a bay leaf, 2 tablespoons of white vinegar, tablespoons of white sherry, a teaspoon of oregano, and a half cup of olive oil. You also need a medium onion, a small green pepper, a couple cloves of garlic, teaspoon of sugar, some Tabasco, and a large minced onion that you're going to use to garnish this. So basically, you want to wash and rinse the beans, and sometimes you got to remove the little rocks that are in there in the beans from the harvest, soak them overnight, drain them out, and put them in a pressure cooker with the bay leaf and the meat bone and the water and cover it 1 or 2 inches in the pressure cooker. Cook it until those beans are nice and tender. Now take and add your vinegar, your sherry, and the sugar and the crushed oregano. Then you go in with the olive oil, saute the onions, pepper and garlic, and then keep cooking it slowly. And when it's cooked, you just want to stir the beans and simmer it for 15 or 20 minutes, and then serve it on rice with your minced onions. Now, for breakfast, you can serve up some fried eggs on top of the beans and the rice and the onions. So now we're going to talk about black bean soup. Now that sounded a little bit like black bean soup, but that was really just black beans on the rice with all those nice little spices in there. So for black bean soup, we need a pound of black beans. We want a medium chopped onion. We want 1 green pepper chopped up nice, 6 stalks of celery chopped up nice, 4 cloves of garlic, 4 tablespoons of oil, 2 smoked ham hocks, because we're trying to make a meal here for about 8 to 10 people, and 8 cups of meat stock, 1 bay leaf, 1 tablespoon of cumin, 1 cup of sherry, and some salt and pepper. And then for your topping, you want a half a cup of parsley, a couple of jalapenos, and a red onion. So we're going to wash those beans. Once again, we're going to look out for those little pebbles that sometimes get in the sacks from the harvest. And we're going to soak those overnight like you always do with beans before you prepare them. You're going to saute your onion, your pepper, your celery, and the garlic in the oil until it's all limp and ready to go. Then you're going to drain the beans, put it all in a large pot with the vegetables, add the bay leaf, the ham hocks, the seasonings, the meat stock, the sherry, cook it for about 2 hours, and then remove any of the meat from the hocks and return that meat to the soup, and remove the bay leaf if you can find it. And then puree, you take half the mixture and you puree it. This is where the blender comes in real handy. And this is really what makes the creaminess to the black bean soup the way some people really are accustomed to enjoying it. And so you puree half of it and then return it back to the pot, stir it back in and keep it warm, and then serve it in bowl with rice. Top it with some salsa made from your parsley and your jalapenos and your chopped red onions. And a lot of people like to put a little doppel of sour cream on there. Now, just looking at this cup of black bean soup makes me so hungry. And it reminds me of where I first ate black bean soup, which was on First Street in Sarasota, just opposite City Hall, Raoul's restaurant. It was owned by the Boraz family, and they made the best black bean soup in the world. Everybody went there from City Hall. The business folks from downtown would go there every day. There'd be 20, 30 people in there. Everybody was having that black bean soup. So I really miss that. It's been a long time since I had a good cup like that. But I thought also, let's do some black bean dip, because this was another recipe I found in the Spanish Point cookbook. And here you need some more black beans, 2 jalapeno peppers, tablespoon of chopped green onion, 2 tablespoons of finely chopped red pepper, 1 orange, flesh only, chopped fine, saving the juice for the dressing. And then you dress it with the combination of 1 tablespoon of dark rum, tablespoon of Dijon mustard, 2 tablespoons of the orange juice that you saved, 2 tablespoons of rice vinegar, and 4 tablespoons of oil. You just mix those beans and the chilies and the onion and the red pepper and the orange in a medium-sized bowl, mix the dressing and combine with the bean mixture, and then serve it with corn chips and jicama, which is like the little Mexican turnips that are, it's like a root crop. It's very light in color and it's sliced really, really thin, and put that on there and get your bean dip. So since I did the black bean dip, I came across this recipe. This one's also from the Spanish Point award-winning cookbook. And this one was presented by Dee Stoudemire. Now, Dee Stoudemire was in the junior league, and she was one of the folks that actually helped to establish Historic Spanish Point as an educational place in the first place. And she's still here in Sarasota. But here's her recipe for what she calls Florida dip, which is made from avocados. So you get and this is a modern recipe. This isn't really an old Florida recipe, but it's using, like a Florida product. And so 2 cans of bean dip, 2 avocados, 2 cups of sour cream, a cup of mayonnaise, 2 tablespoons of lemon juice, 2 packages of taco seasoning mix. You see, this is a modern recipe now. 1 bunch of green onions, 3 tomatoes, 2 cans of chopped olives, and 8 ounces of grated cheddar cheese. So you spread this bean dip in a 3-quart Pyrex dish. Then you mash the avocados with lemon juice and spread it over the bean dip. Then you mix the sour cream, the mayonnaise, the taco mix, and spread it over the avocado. Then you chop the onions, drain it, put it over the sour cream mixture, spread the cheese all over this, chill it for at least 2 hours, and serve it with corn chips. So we've got a black bean dip, we got a Florida dip made out of avocado. Can't do a program about, old Florida food and Cuban influence on Florida food without talking about a Cuban sandwich. And the Cuban sandwich that we buy today is a little bit different than the authentic Cuban sandwich. But I'm going to take this woman's word for it, Viola Goldberg, because she was of Cuban descent, grew up in Tampa back in the day. I knew her well over the years. She was very much involved in historical work in Sarasota. And she prefaced her recipe for the Cuban sandwich with this little narrative. And she talks about how it really wasn't originally a commercial product. It was something that people made in their homes so that they could earn some extra money. And the hams were cooked, and sometimes neighbors would come together and they would all be cooking the different hams that they needed. And then that would all share in the income. And they would have fresh pork ham, cooked very much like the whole baby pig, marinated with sour orange, garlic, salt, pepper, and oregano. And then they'd also make a sugar baked ham, was also cooked and sugared on the outside. And then they would hit it with a hot iron to kind of sear in all the juices. And according to Viola, these 2 hams, along with the bread, are really the basis for the original Cuban sandwich. So let's get into making that sandwich. So we need some Cuban bread, cut into 8 or 10-inch sections and slice it down the middle. We need the fresh pork ham, 2 slices per bread piece. And then the sugar baked ham, 2 slices per bread piece. And then some salami. And this is interesting because of the history of Tampa and Ybor City in cigar making, it attracted not only people from the island of Cuba, but Europeans, Italians came over. So they brought their salami. So the salami gets inserted into this Cuban tradition, which is kind of interesting. And then Swiss cheese on top of that, dill pickle, thinly sliced, and then butter. And so the traditional sandwich has butter today. Most of your Cuban sandwiches are going to come with mayonnaise and mustard, but the traditional one, according to Viola, was butter. And this has become, just something that everyone has enjoyed, I think, is a good Cuban sandwich, especially here in Florida. Now, this one's a little bit sad to me. If you know me at all, you know that I spent about 20 years of my life working with marine turtles on the conservation end. But the reality is that 250 years ago, and actually all the way up until 1977, you could go out to the beach and take a turtle. And it was easy hunting because the turtle had no defenses. And when that female turtle is out of that water up on that beach laying her eggs, she's in a trance. She doesn't even know what you're doing. So they'd go up there, let her lay her eggs, and they would grab her off the beach and then harvest her for the meat. And in that 1914 Women's Club cookbook, Mrs. J.W. Keener didn't really provide a recipe, but this is what she had to say. She said the meat of these huge turtles tastes very much like beef, ground like sausage, seasoned, stuffed into green peppers and bakes. It makes a novel and appetizing dish. It may also be prepared and fried as beef steak. Now, she is describing mostly the situation with a green turtle, which is a vegetarian, which is the turtle that turtle soup was made out of, that was consumed at fancy resorts and on cruise ships and things like that. Loggerhead turtles are not that tasty, is my understanding. They are meat eaters. They eat a lot of crabs and things like that. And their meat is not as delicious as the green turtle. Loggerheads were much more common along the shoreline here, but there were many greens here as well. In fact, greens pretty much went extinct along the west coast of Florida and then began to return in the 1990s due to conservation efforts, probably over on the east coast of Florida. At any rate, it was very common back in the day for people to turn turtles on the beach to augment their diet. You would have seen this a lot in the pioneer days of Sarasota. You would have seen it during the Great Depression and things like that. Turtle Beach on Siesta Key takes its name because that was the most convenient place to Sarasota where you could go and find the turtles. And so there you have it. You can't do it now. We'd never dream of doing it now, but they did it back then. So I think we will pause and see if we have any questions before we move into the next section, which is going to be the sweets and the treats.
Great, thank you. Would you explain a bit more what Kunti was?
Sure. Kunti is a plant that we have growing at Spanish Point. I'm sure there's some here at the downtown campus. It's a cycad. It looks like a fern or a cross between a fern and a palm tree. And it has a starchy root. And it is somewhat toxic if you don't prepare it correctly. Kunti used to grow all over Florida through habitat loss and over harvesting back in the early days, kind of disappeared, and now it's coming back. You see a lot of it planted around City Hall and downtown Sarasota. It grows about 2 feet tall, and it has like a fern-like or a cycad-like leaf. And it was heavily consumed by Native Americans in Florida, early pioneers in Florida. It became quite the industry to harvest it in Florida, and that's what I can share with you about Kunti.
All right. Do Seminole Indians still eat these foods today?
Yes, they do. All the foods that I talked about are the foods that they're eating today and sharing with others who come to their celebrations. Of course, they eat a lot of alligator, fish. They raise cattle, and so they do have access to many other things beyond just the subsidized federal diet that was very, very common back in the 1930s and 40s and such. So, like I say, if anybody wants to enjoy some of this authentic Seminole food, all you have to do is go down to the reservation, the Atataki Museum. It is, east of Immokalee. You go to Immokalee, you keep going until you think you're lost, and then you keep going until you think you're lost, and you keep going, and you finally end up at the museum. And they have a great celebration there in the first weekend of November, typically, and you can eat all these foods, and it's delicious.
Great. Tell us about the artwork you showed in the beginning of the program.
Well, I always like to do those little preview slides because for the folks that are sitting in the waiting room, I like for them to be able to see that we're here and ready to do the program. And today I selected citrus product labels, very typical of the product labels that were used from the 1890s all the way up through the 1940s to decorate and advertise and promote the sale of the various citrus products. And the ones that I selected today, you might have noticed had a theme to them. They were all birds. And I did that because we have the new exhibit opening this week, the high life of bird photography. And so I thought I would align the little graphic images from the citrus product labels with our new exhibition. So everybody should come out and check that out and be inspired by the birds.
Great. And then just one more question. How did Great Britain obtain Florida from Spain?
Yeah, so Great Britain's Navy captured Havana and Manila in the Philippines, and then went back to Spain and said, if you want them back, we get Florida. And so that was the deal that they cut. And that's how Florida was owned by Britain. And Florida was owned by Great Britain from 1863 to 1883. It was a 20-year period of time. They did a lot of investigating. They did a lot of planning, but they never really fully optimized Florida the way they had intended to. We could do a whole program on the various histories of Florida, but I appreciate the question.
All right. Thank you, John.
All right, so let's keep going. We're going to delve into some sweets and treats. So again, going with the Cuban theme, we need to talk about flan. And I went back to Viola Goldberg because she's my authority as far as I'm concerned. And so here are the ingredients that we need for flan. We need 2 3/4 cups of milk, and we're going to scald that milk. We need a cinnamon stick. We need 1/4 cup of dark rum. We need a grated rind of the orange, 4 eggs, 4 egg yolks, 3/4 cups of sugar, And then for our caramel mixture, we need 3/4 cup of sugar and 1/3 cup of water. So you're going to heat the sugar in the water until that's dissolved, bring it to a rapid boil and continue boiling it until it's deep brown. Then you're going to pour that into a 1.5 quart baking dish, and you're going to rotate that dish around so that the caramel covers the entire inside area. And then you're going to let that cool down. Now you're going to take those other ingredients that you have, you're going to beat all that together. You're going to pour that over the caramel coating, and then you're going to set that dish that you have inside a larger pan that's partially filled with hot water. You need that exterior hot water to be up about halfway on the side of the dish that's actually holding your flan. And then you're going to bake that at 325 degrees for 1.5 hours, or until a knife or toothpick inserted in the middle comes out nice and clean. Then you're going to cool that and refrigerate it. And then when you're ready to serve it, you're going to loosen it a little bit. Then you're going to turn it upside down and put it into the shallow dish. So you start with the caramel in the bottom, but when you flip it, the caramel ends up on top. And so, again, this is a very traditional Cuban recipe brought to this area by the early people that came. And then later, when many more people of Cuban descent came to, for instance, the Tampa area to roll cigars, which was a huge migration of people, they brought these recipes with them, and these became very popular dishes in this part of Florida. This recipe is one that my wife has made a couple of times, and she highlighted it in the book and said this was a good recipe. So I wanted to share it with you. We did a little key lime stuff last time, but I thought we'd squeeze this one in. And key lime drop cookies. Sounds good. You need a half a stick of butter, a cup of sugar, 2 teaspoons of grated key lime peel, 1 egg lightly beaten, a half a cup of key lime juice, 3 cups of flour, half a teaspoon of cinnamon, 4 teaspoons of baking powder. And you want to mix that all up in the bowl. You want to mix the butter, the sugar, and the key lime peel. Then you beat in your egg and the key lime juice. And then in another bowl, you want to sift the flour, the cinnamon, and the baking powder and beat that into the butter mixture. And then you want to drop it like by teaspoonfuls onto an ungreased cookie sheet, and then bake that at 375 degrees until it comes out light, very light brown, and then remove it and cool it. And these are delightful little cookies, as you would imagine, with the flavor of the key lime, which is such a unique and tasty treat. Well, as I was reading back through Bernard Roman's book, because I ended up reading several of the chapters, read practically the whole book in preparation for this program, and I found this quote: "The liquor is as important as the victuals." So with that in mind, I looked for a couple other recipes that were old Florida recipes, and I found them in our old cookbooks. And here's another one by Fran Newton called Watermelon and Rum. And this one's real simple. You get yourself a watermelon, you take a knife and you cut into it, and you dig down into it. You try to make a nice slice like a cone, like an inverted cone, and you pull that out. And then you pour in, as Fran says here, a little rum. But really, it's as much as it will take. So you might have half the bottle in that watermelon by the time you're done. Put that plug back in there, let it stand for 3 days, and then take it to the picnic well chilled, and all your friends will enjoy it. And here's another one with rum. And we'll talk about why these are all rum here in a couple minutes. This recipe is by Kathy Crowley. This one is also in the Spanish Point cookbook. And for this one's called baked bananas with rum. And you need 6 bananas, 2 tablespoons of rum, and a tablespoon of lime juice. And then you peel a thin strip from each banana and scoop out the fruit. Then you mash it all up and add the rum and the lime juice. Then you put it back into the banana peel. And then with the open side on the top where you've mashed it all back in, you bake it at 400 degrees for about 7 minutes or until it turns light brown, and then you can just eat it right out of the banana peel. So that's your baked bananas with rum. So those are 2 kind of dessert items that include a liqueur, if you will. The reason why rum is because, as most people know, rum is made from distilling sugar. And Cuba was a huge sugarcane production and rum production place. There were really two kinds of rum. There was aguardiente, which is a rum that in other places is made out of other things than sugar, but sugar is the primary purpose or the primary ingredient in the New World. And aguardiente was a kind of a crude rum. It would have been fermented and boiled down once or twice, but when you get into rum proper, that's been through 4 or 5 kettles, if you will, in the process. So the aguardiente, which was kind of the primitive rum, and then the rum itself, those are both products of Cuba, products of any place that had sugarcane, but Cuba was one of the major sugarcane production areas of the world. So now we're going to leave the dessert behind, and I've got this one recipe here for the mojito. And the mojito is a very, very old mixed drink. In fact, most sources say this is the first mixed drink that was ever concocted. And mojitos have become more popular in recent years. And you need some mint leaves, you need some lime. You could use a key lime if you had it for sure. 2 tablespoons of cane sugar, some white rum, and then some club soda. And to make a mojito, you need your muddler, your little tool there to muddle up the mint leaves, the sugar, and the 2 of those 3 slices of lime in the bottom of the cup. Then you fill it up with ice, pour in the rum, and if you like, you can add some club soda. And then you can garnish it with a little more mint and that last slice of the lime that you saved. And then you can drink away. And here's your mojito. Now, in going back through the history of this thing, it's amazing. But mojito is a native of Cuba. There is no doubt. There are a couple of different stories as to who kind of came up with it. One of the stories is it was the African Americans that were working in the sugarcane fields came up with it. But there's also a story of how Sir Francis Drake in the 1500s, as he's sacking Havana, all his crew became ill and they were all sick. And he turned to the people that lived there and said, "What do I do?" And they said, "They need mint and they need lime." So the mint was to kind of calm the stomach, and the lime was to take care of scurvy. And so that's why the mojito was invented back in the 1500s. But in any case, whether Sir Francis Drake, he gets the credit for it, but really it came from the people that were living there that have been drinking this drink all along. So if you have a mojito, just know that you are drinking basically a 500-year-old drink. It is amazing. All right, so that kind of wraps up my recipes for today. I moved a little faster today than I normally do, but I do want to tell you that I've saved some of the best for last. And so next month, we are going to do this again, and it will be the final part 3 of our 3-part series for this summer. And we're going to do some Osprey favorites. So we're actually going to look at some recipes of what the people that were living around historic Spanish Point campus back in the day, what they were eating, some of their specialties. And I'll just give you a little clue. One of those is going to be, I finally found a recipe for oyster pie. I've been looking for years and years. I finally found that. We're also going to talk about some Sarasota favorites, some of the things that were eaten in the downtown Sarasota area back in the day and that were very traditional, became very traditional for our area. And then we're always going to wrap it up with sweets and treats. And as Bernard Roman said 250 years ago, the liqueurs are as important as the victuals. So we'll probably include a few of those as well. But throughout this whole process, I have tried to save some of the best for last. So I would encourage you to join us next month as well. But we do have some time for questions if you have any. And we'll turn it back over to Amanda to see if we have any questions from our audience today.
No, I think you've answered all of the questions that were in here.
Okay.
So,
Okay. All right. Well, folks, thanks so much for joining us today. If you missed the first episode or any of the other historical briefings, they are all housed up on the Marie Selby Botanical Gardens YouTube site. So just go to YouTube online, type in Marie Selby Botanical Gardens, and then you can click on videos and you can go down and see all the great videos that have been produced by the Selby Garden staff, whether it's botanical, exhibition related, history, or in this case, the recipes. They're all on there. And we'll be back next month. I think it's August 20th. and another Wednesday at noon, and we will do part three. And I appreciate everyone joining us today. And Amanda, I appreciate your help. And thanks for joining us.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.